Again, we do the same thing every week. We talk about this concept of T, E, and A, where our thoughts create our emotions, and our emotions create our actions. This week, what we wanted to do was we want to introduce this concept of the invisible fence, and I'm going to have Brent help me out with this because he's actually, well, I think the way it worked is I originally taught it to Brent, and then Brent started teaching it way more than I teach it. So we're going to kind of tag team teaching of this invisible fence metaphor. And so what we need at the beginning, though, here is instead of, we're just going to go right in. We're even going to skip the 4 steps. We're just going to go right into some thoughts we're going to just identify some emotions, unhealthy emotions. But what I want to do is I want to I want these emotions to be emotions wrapped around situations with other people. And then we're going to identify the thoughts associated with those. And so I'll give you one from today. I was meeting, so just type some in if you want to, but I was meeting a lady for lunch, and we were talking about some of the things we're going to be talking about tonight, actually. And one of the things that she was talking about the fact that her husband has a temper, and her husband gets very irate. And so the emotion for her, well, frankly, it's gotten now to be total. She's just very angry, and the thought is he treats me horribly. Okay, and so these are the kind of emotions and thoughts we want to talk about tonight, where there's kind of these connections between anger and another person. So let's just do 3 of these real quick, because as we're going to see with this invisible fence story, and we might come back to this lady I talked with at lunch today as an example, but as we're going to see in this invisible fence story, it starts helping us clear out of our head what it is that we're responsible for and what others are responsible for, a little bit like we talked about last week, but it kind of connects the dots in with these emotions and thoughts as well. So somebody on the panel, let's just throw out another emotion that I can write down here, similar to this kind of relational situation.
Fear.
Okay.
Are my girls going to be okay?
Okay. And then I'm going to add another one. There was another lady I was talking to last week, and now this lady up here with the anger thing, she's still married, but this other lady is not married, and so she has fear, but the fear she has is she's taking her ex-husband back to court, and so she's actually afraid her ex-husband, my ex-husband, is going to physically hurt me. In other words, there's a fear that the ex is going to come like over to the house and physically abuse her because of the necessity to go back to court. Now, you can see within all of these, we have something very much in common. And what we have in common is that there's emotions that are occurring, and there's also thoughts, but the thoughts all kind of revolve around this kind of otherness, this other person, other people. And so the question then is, how do we know if the emotion is in us here, how do we know what's the healthy way to respond when this otherness is really the thought? The thought has to do with somebody else. In other words, if I'm afraid, for instance, of losing my job, well, that's not really, I'm not afraid of somebody else. I'm afraid that I'm going to lose my job. if I'm afraid that I'm going to get a bad grade on a test, I'm not, this doesn't have anything to do with anybody else. But the real question comes in, what do I do if the fear is a real fear, and the fear is coming from a real situation, from a real other person? So for instance, if I say I'm angry and he treats me horribly, all of a sudden we say, well, there's got to be something that's not true about this thought. Well, that is correct. There is something that's not true about that thought. However, at the same time, we run into the issue of what do we do about the situation? And this gets asked to me over and over again. So this lady who's taken her husband back to court, or ex-husband back to court, will call me and say, what do I do? How do I handle it? Here, this lady says, he treats me horribly. Last night he called me these, names that you would all be familiar with, I'm sure. And what do I do? How do I don't even know what to do. Do I kick him out? Do I call the police? Do I let him get by with it? Do I just not say anything? Do I ignore it and hope it'll go away? You get the point. These kind of questions are asked to me all the time. What do I do? How does this work? I don't know what to do. What's my part? Maybe I made him mad. If I made him mad, then I'd be the reason why he's treating me horrible. Well, if I made him mad and he's treating me horrible, how can I, how can I kick him out when I'm the one that was doing the thing that made, you see how confusing this gets. And this is what we want to address tonight. And I think these are some decent examples of how we could, of situations of where what we're going to talk about tonight will apply to these situations. I hope anyways, and we'll see. So, Brent, what I'd like you to do is, just as if you were teaching this in at one of your seminars,
right.
One of your men's ministry, maybe your retreats. I know you've taught this at your retreats before. You've taught this at your seminars before. What I'd like you to do is just kind of teach us like you would teach anyone at one of these seminars, and I'll try to draw some things up for you on the board while you're teaching this, and then you can also redirect my drawing as we move forward. So how would you start out explaining this concept of the invisible fence if you were just starting from scratch?
I would probably take an illustration first, and let me just kind of make something up off the cuff. Let's say that you have a couple who is married, and the husband is a traveling salesman. Let's just say he's a traveling salesman. And so he's on the road quite a bit, and it makes the wife, very uncomfortable because she doesn't know who he's going to be with, what time he's going to get back to his hotel at night, what time he's going to be calling home, all those type of things. And so let's just start with that. That's the scenario. How I would do this is I would start with somewhere. I'd say, let me ask you a question. Anybody out there have an invisible dog fence? And you're always going to have someone, in a crowd of 300 or 400 people that he's either had one put in themselves or they had one when they moved in. And so what I would typically do is I would go ahead and I would draw a box on the screen. And what this box is going to illustrate, this is going to be the invisible dog fence. Now, if you don't have one and you're not sure what it is, it's a parameter that is set up so that if the dog gets too close to the edges, you see the dog is on the inside of this fence. If the dog gets too close to the edges, what begins to happen is they hear a little beeping sound. And the beeping sound, then, if they get too close to the edge, what it turns to is it turns to a little bit of a shock. The closer they get, the longer they stay there, the more uncomfortable it becomes. And so what Derek has going on here now, as you see, he's got his house, and the parameters around is where the invisible dog fence are set up. So now, Derek, if you would, just kind of put a little X in the house. And we'll say this is you, and you've got a dog, and your dog's name is what?
Fido.
Fido, okay.
Right.
We're not going to go with Champ tonight. We're going to go with Fido. Okay, so here's Fido. Now, inside this yard, Fido can go anywhere. He's got all this freedom. He can run anywhere to all these corners and play and do all kinds of neat stuff. He has all that freedom.
Look at him running. Look at him.
Look at him going. He's circular.
Look at him.
He has no legs.
Oh.
What would his real name be? Would it be just anyhow?
Oh,
So
first base.
yeah. So now this dog has all this freedom to go everywhere. You can see he's barking now. And that's all. Don't make him do any other physical things here. But he has all this freedom. You little dog piles here.
Yeah.
Now, before the very foundations of the earth, before the very foundations of the earth, this invisible dog fence, these boundaries, is what God put in place. Before the very foundations of the earth, He said, you have all this freedom inside of this. But if you get too close to the edge, you're going to experience some discomfort. And that lets you know that where you're headed is not a good place. And that's not there to punish you. It's there to let you know that I love you. Now, let's say this. Derek, let's say your dog, Fido, runs down and he gets zapped at the edge of the fence, okay? So make an arrow going down from Fido. Maybe Fido was in the house with you and he has run down to the edge of the fence, got an arrow going down, and he's clear down there at the edge, and we know what happens. He gets zapped. Where's the first place he's going to run back to? He's going to run back. Derek, where's he going to run?
Home.
Yeah, he's going to run home. But wait a minute. He's running back to the one who made the fence. Why would he go back to the one who put the fence up that caused him the pain? Because he knows it's safe. What would happen, Lisa, if that dog gets outside of the parameters of that fence, what might happen to the dog?
I'll give you a
Be
hint.
harmed by other
Eaten by a
things.
coyote.
Get hit by a car,
Yeah,
road.
I like the coyote when it can get eaten by a coyote. But it's not good things that are going to happen. And the thing is with us, God knows the same thing. He knows that inside of His freedom is the best place to be. When we begin to move outside of His grace and His freedom is where we get ourselves in trouble. And so now you see we have a semi coming down. So anyhow, so you see what happens when the dog runs to the edge of the fence, the dog gets zapped and realizes the best place for it to be is back where its master is, because he knows that his master loves him. Go ahead and go to a new piece now, Derek.
Oh,
I see we erased our dog doo-doo there.
Oh,
What was that, Lisa?
that he just needs to work on the three-dimensional stuff with the cars. That
no, I live in a. I live in a.
Is that X inside the truck? Is that the dog underneath it?
Yeah.
But the dog's name is now Splat.
Yeah, right.
No longer Fido.
He's just Spot.
I live in a two-dimensional flat world. Actually.
world.
Okay, go ahead, Brent.
All right. So now he draws another box. Now this fence, the edges of it are energized by lies. So the parameters where the current is running through, we're going to call these the lies. And that's what is energizing this fence. What's electrifying you when you hit it are the lies. And these lies are coming from the enemy. Now inside of this box, this invisible fence, we have the fruit of the Spirit, which is where God's freedom is. We have things like kindness and peace and joy and patience and love and gentleness and faithfulness and self-control. These are the fruit of the Spirit. When we're walking in God's ways, in His grace, we experience His fruit. And that's where He knows we want to be, so we stay there. And that was my dog just now biting my cat. Sorry about that in the background.
Very nice.
So
Wow,
again,
wow.
yeah, I know they're getting violent. They're talking about dogs here, and the cat's getting jealous. But you see, again, the fence is energized by the lies. So what happens is, now go ahead and go to another box, Derek. In the inside of this box, as we know, we have the fruit of the Spirit. We just showed all those words. But when you get to the edges, we have the deeds of the flesh on the outside edges of this fence. And the deeds of the flesh would be what, you guys? Name some.
Fornication.
Jealousy,
Well, when I think
rage.
Yeah, envy. Yeah, envy, fear.
Lust,
Strife.
rage, anxiety, depression,
Yeah.
Lust,
Doubt.
rage. Got it.
jealousy, yeah. And so you see what happens when we get close. This is one of the ways that we know when we're getting too close to the fence. God put this in place so when we begin to feel the deeds of the flesh, we know we're getting into an area that God never really intended us for us to be. Derek Manning had to put his name on there.
Yeah. Derek Mattinger's fornication.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I own that now.
Okay, let's go to a new screen. Derek will thank you for that.
It's in there. It's actually like the third or It's the second thing listed, so it's high up on the list.
You'll need to give him credit
Don't
if you
do
ever do a
that.
book using this illustration.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is another box now. And what we have, on the very top, I want you to write God's inside that box. And then in the bottom, I want you to write the word boundaries down at the bottom. These are God's boundaries. You can see how big this playing field is, all this freedom. Now, let's say that this salesman is not calling his wife until, sometimes 2 in the morning, or not at all sometimes. He's not checking in or whatever's happening, or too many trips, she doesn't know what's going on. And she gets very uncomfortable with his traveling on the road, doesn't know, maybe there could be another woman involved, maybe he's drinking, whatever it might be. And so she's realizing, you know what, this could be a bad thing for that person. Her intentions are good. But what ends up happening next is something that is actually not good. Draw a smaller box now inside of that box, Derek. What ends up happening is the spouse begins to worry that God's boundaries aren't working. And so what they do is they draw smaller boundaries around their spouse. And again, this can go either way, husband to wife, wife to husband. But what ends up happening is now the spouse, believing that God's boundaries aren't doing what they're supposed to do, wanting usually the best for the person, acts out in a way that isn't healthy. And what they try to do is they try to control the spouse and manipulate them to get them to do what they want them to do. And so this, again, this smaller box, what that begins to do, what would that make you feel like if someone started putting a smaller boundary around you than what God had?
Well, you feel trapped and
Well,
controlled
it feels-
and...
Yeah.
Yeah.
Restricted.
And,
Oh,
and,
very
and,
negative.
and Derek or anybody, what would that make you want to do?
Run.
Yeah. Exactly what's going on. And so what ends up happening now is this salesman goes, you know what, I'm not going to be controlled by you anymore. I'm going to break out of here. Now, at the same time, you've got rebellion. Let's go to another box now, Derek. And draw the 2 boxes again, but in this one, I want you to write in the top of the inside box, write the 2 boxes.
You want 2 different boxes on this one?
Yeah, this will be like number 5 here.
Like this?
No, one inside the other, I'm sorry. You can make one big box and one inside of it. There we go. Now inside of this, in the top of the inner box, write control, and underneath it put law, and then at the very bottom put rebellion. This is one of the things we always talk about is when you have like a little kid and you tell that child, don't you touch that stove, what's the first thing that child wants to do?
Touch the stove.
Touch the stove. And so that's what the law does. The Bible talks. Derek, do you have a verse you can pull up on that?
Yeah. I like this. For while we are in the flesh, the sinful passions are aroused by the law.
Wow.
And you can see what ends up happening is when we begin to feel controlled, we want to rebel. I mean, that's going to be our human nature. We want what the law does to us. Now, what that person who drew the smaller box, this is a great verse. Go to Romans 14:4, Derek.
Okay.
Let's go to the message on this. If you've got it up there, you probably do. This is a great translation of this verse. Now,
This one?
that's not. Is that the message?
Yeah.
There it is. If there are corrections to be made or manners to be learned, God can handle that without your help. I mean, that's like a punch in the stomach, especially if you're the one who's wanting to do the controlling. Because what we have to let go of is realizing God loves this person more than we could ever love them. God's boundaries are still working. And it's hard not to want to control by putting that smaller box and allowing ourselves to pull away and allow God to do what He's going to do. It doesn't mean that we don't have boundaries. But one of the things we always talk about is boundaries are always for yourself. You can't put boundaries around someone else. You can only put boundaries around yourself. But what we've bought into is somehow that we can control someone else by trying to get them and make them do what we want them to do, when what we need to do is put the boundary around ourselves. Now, another great verse, again, someone would say, well, then what about the person who broke out? I mean, the person who rebelled. I mean, whose fault was it that they broke through that fence? Well, there's two things kind of going on here. Number one, yes, absolutely. That person who rebelled and broke through the fence and took off, absolutely, it was their responsibility, personal responsibility. Look up Galatians 5, 7 through 10 in the Message. This is a great one on personal responsibility. You were running superbly. Who cut in on you, deflecting you from the true course of obedience? This detour doesn't come from the one who called you into the race in the first place. In other words, you can't blame somebody else. And please don't toss this off as insignificant. It only takes a minute amount of yeast, to permeate an entire loaf of bread. So now what's happening in that is God is saying, wait a minute, you were running a good race. Who caused you to do this? Nobody else can cause you to make a poor choice. You are the one who chooses, like we talked about last week when Derek went through the house that was on fire. The wife set the house on fire. Can the man blame the wife for leaving the house or going back in to save his child? No. He is personally responsible for getting himself out or going back in and saving the child, whatever. Now this is an interesting end of this verse, because what he's done now is almost like he's gone from the person who has acted out to the controller in verse 10. Look at verse 10. Deep down, the master has given me confidence that you will not defect, but the one who is upsetting you, whoever he is, will bear the divine judgment. It's the same thing for them. Who is causing you to want to control this person? Not the one who called you into this race in the first place. And then we come back again to the Romans 14:4. Which is, if there's corrections to be made or manners to be learned, God can handle that without my help. Another great one here, this is a really powerful one, and this would be for the controller. Derek, go to 1 Peter 4:1. Again in the Message translation. Our tendency is when we're trying to control someone, we're wanting to make them do what we want them to do. And why is it we do that to the other person? Anybody? Why would you want to control someone?
Well, it's trying to help us feel better, more secure, or we're getting our worth from it in some way.
Yeah. We're trying to manipulate that person because we're tired of feeling uncomfortable. We want to change them so that we can feel better about ourselves. And in the meantime, we're being tyrannized by all that unhealthy emotion and trying to control them. Look at this verse. Since Jesus went through everything you're going through and more, learn to think like him. Think of your sufferings as a weaning away from the old sinful habit of always expecting to get your own way. Then you'll be able to live out your days free to pursue what God wants instead of being tyrannized by what you want. Now apply that verse back to this invisible dog fence. You'll be able to live out your days free. In other words, you'll be able to erase your control box because you're beginning to trust that God has this whole thing under control, which in essence is going to change, because what's happened is when you've tried to put that box around somebody else, whether you realize it or not, you've just moved toward the lies on the edges of the fence because you're feeling anxiety or anger or fear or doubt or worry. So what we in essence have done, go ahead, Lisa.
That's a good point. Yeah.
It's the same thing when we try to get someone else's good approval of us. Someone might say, well, what if they don't want what I have to offer them? What if I'm trying to move toward them and they don't want it from me? Well, then what they've just done is they've chosen to go ahead and move again toward the lie of, I don't want anything from you. I'm not going to love you. I'm going to go ahead and move away from you. Because what we know is that when we give to a person, when we don't try to box them in, when we don't try to take from them, but when we give to them, it not only changes, us, but there's a good chance it's going to, change them. Paul talks about this when he says, I get into their world. He says, I don't take on their way of life. I think, where is that? That's in, anybody know what that is? I know it's in Corinthians. Is it in 2 Corinthians, or 1 Corinthians 9, or is it in Romans?
That I become all things to all people.
Yeah, well, here's even a better one. You got that one? 9:1, 19:1? There it is. Yeah, here what Paul is saying is, he's free of the demands and expectations of everyone. What he's doing is voluntarily becoming a servant in order to reach all these people. And you notice he says, I don't take on their way of life. These meticulous moralists and, the loose living and moralists and all this stuff. I didn't take on their way of life, but I kept my bearings in Christ. I entered their world and tried to experience things from their point of view. Now, Derek, go to, this is important, this ties right in with Romans 14, verse 1. You know, when a person is acting out inside this fence and they're moving toward the lies, everybody has a history in their life. Things have happened to us from the time we were born that, as we were children, many of those things were out of our control. We didn't have any responsibility personally for someone maybe sexually abusing someone verbally, physically. As a child, there are things that happen to us. And even as adults, there's things before we have the mind of Christ that we realize we can conquer these things. We've been buying into lies, and so we kind of have a history. We've kind of built our own philosophy or theology out of some of these lies, this distorted truth. And so this is really powerful because it ties back into what we just had. Look at this verse. It says, "Welcome with open arms, fellow believers who don't see things the way you do. And don't jump all over them. Don't box them in every time they do something or say something you don't agree with, even if it seems that they are strong on opinion but weak in the faith department. Remember, they have their own history to deal with, so treat them gently." Now, I think, Derek, you can take this here in a second, because I think what happens is this can get muddy. We're saying, wait a minute, you know, my spouse had an affair, or my spouse is addicted to pornography, or there's something going on here. How do I treat that person gently? How do I get into their world? You know, like for instance, I know last week or 2 weeks ago we talked about pornography, and maybe the person who was dealing with pornography had a history of being sexually abused. And I know I had spoken with someone recently who saw images at a very young age that they never should have seen. Someone actually made them sit in front of a television to watch these things. And they didn't want it, but again, the distorted lies, as this person became older, found themselves back on the internet, you know, going from porn site to porn site. And their spouse really didn't know how to deal with this. And the tendency is to want to go ahead and draw that smaller box in the big box and say, you know what, I'm shutting you off, I'm not going to bed with you, I'm not sleeping with you. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to withdraw totally and not talk to you. And we know neither side is right. Neither the guy running to the pornography nor, you know, totally cutting someone off may be the right thing to do. Now, it could be, possibly, if you're needing to draw a boundary around yourself. But Derek, and I'll just kind of, you know, finish up with that. You know, there's some other little boxes we could. Let me do one more box, and then I want you to come back to that. I want you to draw this one more box.
You're mighty boxy tonight.
I am. I feel like boxing here. Now, I want you to draw an X right on the edge of the fence. Now, this is Fido. And go ahead and put your, there he is, he's Fido. Now, let's say that Fido, you know, he was hanging out by the edge too long, and he got zapped. I mean, he did something, let's say it could be Fido, it could be Tom. But they've done something that was painful. They have, you know, they've sinned. It's been painful. They were caught in their sin, and they're hurting. They're down there flopping around like your dog getting zapped. It's now feeling the pain of its poor choices. Now, would you, as the dog owner, go over to where that dog is and kick the dog right after it's already flopping around on the ground feeling the pain? I mean, was there anybody here who would do that to their dog?
No.
Yeah. Why wouldn't you do that?
Oh, because my wife likes my dog.
But seriously, why wouldn't we go over and kick our dog right when it's in the middle of feeling the pain?
It's already suffered the consequences.
Yeah. So then the question is, then why, as Christians, many times do we do that to those who have fallen? Because that's exactly what we end up doing many times when we gossip, when we draw these smaller boxes, when we condemn. You know, God's conviction is enough. And staying in the middle where the love is, the beautiful thing is, God never leaves us, and we know the safe place to come back to. God's grace, again, the law drove us to want to get to the fence, but it is grace that pulls us back in obedience, back to the Father. Derek, go back and talk about boundaries, if you would.
Yeah. What I'll do is let's use the example of, we'll call her Sally. Let's use the example of Sally where her husband has a tendency, they have a tendency to get in arguments, and Sally's husband we'll call him Sam. Doesn't matter. Sally's husband, Sam, when they get into an argument, Sam becomes his language becomes very strong, and he becomes, when I say verbally abusive, all I mean is the screaming and yelling matches that come from both of them and the put downs that come from both of them. And Sally then is trying to figure out, what do I do with that? Now, for instance, if, and this is pretty common in many relationship scenarios where they start arguing about something, and let's say that they're arguing about, this is a good one, they're arguing about kids. And in particular, Sally is saying, hey Sam, I don't want you to be so harsh on the kids. Don't be so tough on the kids. And Sam comes back and says, I'm not about to let them grow up like your family, getting by with everything. Now you see where this is going to go. She's then going to be defensive. That's not what I'm talking about. And then he goes, well then why don't you raise the kids if I'm not good enough? I'm just making this whole thing up. This has nothing to do with this lady I even talked to today. I can just hear this scenario playing out. Maybe it's because I played it out. Okay, why don't you, if I'm not good enough, why don't you raise the kids? There you go again, jumping to conclusions. I mean, I hope somebody can relate to this kind of dialogue, because it's just this back and forth. I mean, this is usually what leads to this entire blow up, okay? And the challenge becomes, Sally recognizes that part of what's happening here is her not responding healthily. Of course, Sam isn't responding healthily either. But during this whole thing, it gets so confusing on what to do when. So we'll use this would be one thing. The other thing we could do is we could continue on with the traveling salesman type of thing. And what's going to happen here is, I won't write it down, but I'll just check them off. Sally says, where you been? Sam says, what do you mean, where have I been? Well, you've been out till 2 in the morning. Are you accusing me of something? I'm just saying you've been out since 2 in the morning and you're just now coming back. And how do I know what you've been doing or where you've been around? You're always blaming me for things, jumping to conclusions. I can't believe you would say that. You see what I'm saying? This is the kind of conversation that you would have, and then there'd just be this humongous blow up, and Sam would start calling Sally names, and Sally would start calling Sam names, and it just gets to be an absolute mess. So let's go over here, and we'll just continue on with the traveling salesman, but I wanted to show a couple different angles of this. So then Sally comes to me, and she says, Derek, I really do think that Sam is having an affair. And so Sally wants to know what to do, because this kind of screaming match of, I can't believe you're doing that, you're not going to be out this late, you can't do that, I'm going to divorce you, you look at what you're doing to the kids, you're going to throw this whole marriage away. I mean, on and on will go, this kind of a deal. And we have the traveling salesman, and so, but Sally, if she can think about this invisible fence, and she can think about Sam being here, okay, immediately what Sally wants to do is, remember, these are God's universal principles. Now, of course, what Brent is saying is, Sally wants to come over here and put a box around Sam. Now, this would happen with the porn situation, too. I don't mean to jump, but I'll give you an example of the traveling salesman and then briefly talk about the porn of what this would look like. Traveling salesman, You might say you have to quit your job. You have to be home. You got to get another job and be home by 5 p.m. every night, so I know you're not out carousing with some other woman. You have to call me every hour and tell me where you're at. If you get what I'm saying. I'm going to review your phone bills. Okay. I'm going to check your phone log. All right. Now, with porn, it would look a little different. I'm going to put a block on the internet. I'm going to block your cell phone. I'm going to throw away all the magazines in the house. I'm going to put a padlock on my underwear drawer. I don't know what all you would do. All right. So anyways, you get the point. This is what we would call putting a box around Sam. Okay. Now here's why this is so challenging. Because it's like, if I say this is putting a box around Sam, then the natural response for Sally is, oh, so let him get by with it? Oh, so let him just quit the job? Oh, so just whatever he wants to do, he can just do? Okay. That would be the natural reaction. The problem is, the moment Sally tells Sam to quit his job, be home at 5, call every hour, review the phone logs, oh yeah, we got to check all the emails. I got to have emails copied to me from all your emails. Do you notice what's happening here? Every one of these things are trying to control Sam. Okay? And this is what Sam is going to resent. So, what is the alternative to this? Well, the alternative to this looks really very different. Because at the end of the day, Sally does want to protect herself. Okay? What do I mean by that? I mean, if Sam has had an affair with some gal over here, we'll call some chick. If he's had an affair with some gal, clearly Sally does not want to be having sex with Sam, especially if he's been out having sex with other women and could have attracted some disease or something like that. So on the one hand, there's some real concerns here, but on the other hand, we have Sally totally trying to control and manipulate Sam. By the way, I very seldom have ever met anyone, and I've met a lot of Sallys, and I've counseled a lot of Sallys, and I very seldom met any Sally that didn't give me this list. The porn list that I mentioned, or this list here of what the man has to do in order to, usually there's a lot of repentance involved, too, that he needs to do. So, I mean, it just goes on and on, the list that Sam needs to do. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, here's a whole different paradigm of how to handle Sam. Here's Sally. Okay, and here's Sam. Sally understands that there's these universal principles that God has in place. She also understands the paradox of control. She understands that when she starts controlling Sam, it's going to make Sam rebel. It's going to make Sam resent Sally. It's going to make Sam rebel against Sally. She's going to, remember we looked at that verse in Romans 7. It says the law arouses the sinful passion. See, when this list becomes the list for Sam, do you think it's going to drive Sam to Sally, or is it going to drive Sam to the chick?
That one's pretty easy.
Yeah.
That one's very easy.
And
See, and do you see how paradoxically ridiculous this list is? Because if we ask the question, I think Derek said it best, that one's pretty easy. If Sally lists all these things, tells Sam what he has to do to live up, gives him all these laws to follow, it's going to drive Sam right into this other lady's arms. So it's not going to get her what she wants. And yet for some reason we think this is the way to go. Okay? The first thing I want you to see is this is not going to help Sally. So this is what I like to explain to Sally. That, okay, first of all, it's not going to help Sam because Sam is going to rebel against these things. And secondly, it's not going to get you what you want. If you want Sam back in your arms instead of this other chick's arms, then doing this is not going to work for you either. So what I like to see or show is that I like to show that the way God kind of has it laid out in Scripture, if you head a different direction, which is this is the opposite direction of what Scripture looks like, if you head in this direction, it just don't work. And so I think just logically it's nice to kind of look through this and go, is it going to work? Well, let's try. Go home and try to do all these things and just see if he goes, you know what? I quit my job, be home at 5, I'll call you every hour, review your phone bills, you can review my emails, and that's just going to make me endear you more. It's just going to make me fall in love with you all over again. I can't believe we didn't do this earlier. I can't believe that you didn't, lay down the law and tell me exactly what to do and micromanage my phone bills and micromanage my emails before 5 years ago, because if you would, I just think that I would have just been fully, deeply in love with you like never before. All right. I think I've made my point.
Yeah, what she's telling him is don't you touch that stove.
Yeah, exactly. And then somehow Sam's going to love Sally for that. What was that, Derek?
I mean, it's almost like Sally's treating Sam like one of her children.
Yeah.
And setting these legalistic boundaries like you might with someone who's still learning.
Like someone that's 2 years old. Yeah. Now, if I use that, you got to be careful with that, because if I say that to Sally, Derek, as a coach or a counselor, if I say, well, you're treating him like a 2-year-old, she would say to me, well, that's because he's acting like a 2-year-old. Okay? So, yes, that is what you're doing. You're treating him like a 2-year-old, and the logic would be, well, he's acting like a 2-year-old. But what's really going on is that it doesn't, treating an adult like a 2-year-old, I've never seen it work real well. And it doesn't work. He rebels, he moves on, she doesn't get what she wants, and it becomes, and ultimately, even if Sam somehow thinks that the church wants him to follow all these rules, all that's going to happen is Sam's going to call me in 5 years and tell me he's filing for divorce, not because he has another chick, but he resents being controlled and manipulated every day of his life. All right. The important thing here is to see that this doesn't work. This way of living doesn't work. The law does not work. All right, so what does work? Now we're going to come back over here. Now remember, Sam is still doing his thing. Here's the chick. Sam is still doing his thing. He's carousing around. Here's Sally. Now, Sally is thinking to herself that Sam, well, I mean, she's not thinking, she knows. I mean, that's the situation. The traveling salesman is having an affair. Okay, that's the situation. But she understands this paradigm versus this paradigm. And so the last thing she is thinking about doing is trying to control Sam's behavior, because all that's going to do is lead to more problems, just like we showed over here. But what can Sally do? Okay. Now, with Sam, the person that's had the affair, there's many things Sally can do to protect herself. And what this looks like, and this is where the boundaries come in, the boundaries come in around Sally. Now, the important thing to understand here is, let me see if I can change the colors. Because this thing that's around Sally is very different than this blue box around Sam. This is a boundary to keep Sally safe. Okay? However, let's go back here to something blue, maybe. This right here, this is God's universal principles. That God allows Sam to break at any moment, and it becomes very painful. Because as one movie said, you can't break the law. You can only break yourself against the law. Now, when we're talking about law here, we're talking about God's universal principles that were laid down at the beginning of earth, at the beginning of time. Principles like reaping and sowing. Principles like integrity. Principles that we know are mainstays of the universe. similar to like the law of gravity. That's kind of the metaphor of God's universal principles. Sally over here, though, decides to say, instead of doing this, which is putting these control boundaries around Sam, she looks at it like, no, I'm going to put a boundary around myself. Well, what does that look like? Well, number one, she could say, Sam, you're having an affair. And you can continue to have the affair if you'd like to have the affair. Now, that sounds very different than, Sam, you're going to show me every email and you're going to show me every phone call. Instead, Sam, if you want to have the affair, have the affair. You can have the affair with the chick. I have no problem with it. That's your choice. I can't stop you from doing that. What do I mean I don't have a problem with it? What I mean is I can't control you. Certainly doesn't mean I agree with you, but I can't stop you. You're a grown man, for crying out loud. You have to choose whatever you want to choose, and there's no way to stop that, is what I mean by that. But what can Sally do? Sally can say, okay, if you're going to date, we'll give her a name. If you're going to date Mary, then you're going to not be able to live in this house. If that's going to protect me and my family. If you're going to have sex with Mary, then we can't have sex. I can't have sex with you, because I'm not comfortable with who you're having sex with. Okay. Now, do you notice these are protecting Sally? Sam calls up Sally, and Sam says, for the 5th time, I'm sorry, I'm never going to do that again. Sally cannot take the phone call. Those are examples of boundaries around Sally, for instance. Okay. Now, what is the difference? Here, Sally is trying to make Sam do something. Over here, every one of these are things that Sally is doing to change. Every one of these are things that Sally is doing to change Sam. This is the key. What can Sally change? Well, in the United States anyways, she has the ability to go to the courthouse and tell Sam that he can't live there anymore if he's having sex with another woman. She has the ability to not have sex with him. She can change that about herself. She has the ability not to take the phone call. Okay? Let's do another one. This time we're going to use a situation where instead of the traveling affair, we're going to have Sam be the raging lunatic. Now, raging lunatic means when they start in a discussion, and every time when they start into a discussion and Sally doesn't agree with Sam, Sam starts to yell and scream. Sam starts to yell and scream because he's not getting his way, and Sally isn't agreeing. And so Sam now becomes a yeller and a screamer. Now, Sally could come over here to Sam and start putting boundaries, what we would call law or boundaries around Sam. She could be saying to him things like, you always do that. You always act this way. I can't believe you're calling me those names again. This is the kind of thing you always do. This is ridiculous. I can't stand being around you like that. What do you, and all this kind of language and screaming and yelling or defensiveness. You know, you're the one that's the problem, not me. I don't understand why you're screaming at me when you're the one that's got the issue. Okay, all this defensiveness, mumbo jumbo, all these emotional attacks get us absolutely nowhere. But that's naturally what happens in these arguments. Now, because he has rage issues, we're going to say, he has anger issues, we could come over here and we could start putting these circles around Sam. Well, here's the deal. Number one, you're going to go to counseling. Number two, you're going to get involved with the Celebrate Recovery group over with Lisa. And number three, you're going to go to church every Sunday. And number four, you're going to start praying with me every morning. And number five, you're going to, we give all this list of things to Sam to do. However, Sally could do something very different. She could put a boundary around herself, something that looks like this. When Sam raises his voice, she removes herself from the house. Sam raises her voice, she goes to another room. Sam starts screaming and yelling and calling expletives. She can call the police. She can get a restraining order. Of course, I'm going more and more, if the guy was...
And Derek, couldn't you also give another choice here? I mean, chances are she's already given this choice, but another one might be you can actually move towards him in those moments and say, what's causing this? I care about you. This isn't the real you I hear talking, so what's going on?
Absolutely.
I mean, that's just another, she's probably done that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. Usually by the time we start thinking about this kind of paradigm of the invisible fence, it's gotten to these humongous extremes.
Yeah.
Okay? And so what, if Sally understands that if she needs to, if she can understand focusing on her, keeping herself safe is what we call healthy boundaries. Unfortunately, the psychological community has done something really weird with boundaries. They've tried to communicate that boundaries are this. Boundaries are when Sam has to check in with me. Boundaries are when Sam has to show me his phone log. That's not, those aren't boundaries. That's control. That's manipulation. Boundaries are things you put around yourself to keep yourself safe. One more situation. I was talking to a girl today. Her dad brought her to see me, and she is in high school, okay? And she was talking about the fact that she really gets stressed out and depressed when when this boy that she likes doesn't text her. And then he doesn't text her for like 2 weeks at a time. Then all of a sudden he texts her. And then when he texts her, she gets all her hopes up. And we talked about the fact that her needing this boy to want her causes a lot of anxiety and causes a lot of stress and this kind of thing. The irony is, though, is what she wants to do is tell Sam, let's say this girl's Sally again, she wants to say, Sam, you need to text me every day. Sam, you need to call me every day. Sam, you need to. Okay? But what she realized today is that, wait a second, what she really wants is when you're doing that, it's really what you're wanting out of that person that's causing the problem, and that becomes manipulation and control and pushes them away. So what can she do? What she can do is turn off her phone. That's something she can do to keep her safe, because when this Sam starts after Sally again with this on and off kind of situation, it moves Sally to unhealthy anxiety and unhealthy depression. She says, I'm not ready for a relationship like that. I'm not grown up enough and healthy enough. And many of us at age 50 or 40 or 30 or 60, doesn't matter, aren't ready for certain situations like that. If we're living in a codependent environment, we're not ready to be engaged in that type of relationship. We have to protect our own emotional life. That's what these boundaries are for. Okay? However, come back to here. Our natural tendency is to try to put these boundaries around Sam. Okay? And then what happens is, so what I'm showing you here is I'm showing you an alternative. When you need to keep yourself safe, I'm showing you an alternative. Okay? But now let's go to what Brent was saying, where a lot of times, and the reason I talk about these things first is because these are the most extreme things that normally can happen, and most life doesn't live like that. Okay? Most life lives like this. Most life lives like Derek and Courtney. Okay? And I'm the dad and Courtney is my daughter. Now, Courtney isn't getting, Courtney does pretty good in school, but Courtney, let's say, is flunking school. She's not doing well in school. Okay? Now, notice, this is a very different situation, but the same principle applies. One of the things I could do is I could put a box around Courtney, and I could say to Courtney, you're going to come home every night and you're going to make sure that I check all of your homework. I'm going to make sure that I call your teachers every week. You need to make sure that you show me all your homework. Okay, now I'm not saying there's not certain times that, Courtney's in high school, for crying out loud. She's getting ready to go to college. I'm not saying there's certain times that wouldn't be the case, but you can see by the time, Courtney's going to be a senior in high school, if I do this to her, how is she going to respond to me? Any ideas, Derek?
you start setting those rules, and she's going to get resentful.
Yeah.
And probably do the opposite of what you want her to do.
That's right. So
Yeah, you'll feel like her jailer.
right, exactly.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
what happens is now this is what I want you to see very clearly, because this is more real life. What happens is, I'm going to take this box around Courtney off, and then hopefully we'll use a couple different examples. So Courtney, I decide I'm not going to list all these rules. I'm going to believe in these universal principles. Okay? So all of a sudden, Courtney or Connor, and Connor's a freshman. Let me change this out real quick. Same situation. I'm not going to repeat it. I'm just going to put Connor in here because this is a real life story. Connor is a freshman. In his first semester of his freshman year, I did none of that. I put no laws in place. I had a conversation with him before he started his freshman year to let him know that he's entering high school and now everything counts. He agreed, and after his first semester, he was running an average grade of about a C. At the end of the semester, he was getting ready for his semester exams. Now notice, when he started his semester, he was getting okay, getting about C's. But he realized then a little bit further into the semester, he was getting decent grades on homework, but he was getting a lot of really bad grades on his tests. Now look at what's happening to Connor. And then semester exams were coming, and since he was getting bad grades on tests, trying to think about getting a good grade on a test for the whole semester, he was getting pretty close to that invisible fence. I was saying nothing. You see what's going on here? Are we on the same page here? Is anybody home?
Yeah, we're with you.
Okay. I have now let Connor get very close to getting a very bad grade on his report card on his semester exams and his first semester his freshman year. He's feeling the electricity at this point because he's thinking, I'm very close to I'm not doing very well anyways. I've never taken semester exams. I have no clue what's happening, but I'm getting very close to this, and I'm feeling the pain right here. Okay? Now, remember, there's Connor, and remember the house, the safe house. And that's where I'm at right here in the safe house. But I'm not putting a big thing around Connor. At this point, Connor starts running back to me saying, Dad, I need help. Okay? Now, what I did was I jumped in and helped him for the first time all semester. I started helping Connor. All right? Let's change the situation around, though. Now Connor goes. He doesn't ask for help. Instead, he gets totally zapped, and he flunks all of his semester exams, okay, in his first semester freshman year. Let's say he did that. Okay? Now guess what he has? He has a real life principal coming after him, and he's paying the consequence for it. Dad's not making him pay the consequence. He's paying the consequence. Now, it's in this moment when Connor gets an F that we have a tendency to go and punish Connor. You see?
Mm-hmm.
See, but Connor's already felt the pain. What we want in that moment is for Connor to ask for help. We want to be there for Connor. We don't want to kick Connor after he gets the Fs. What we do, though, as parents, is we do something different. Connor starts not doing good in grades, and then we go, here, no, you got to do this, 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 stop. And he never feels the pain because we get in the way of him learning.
Derek, what's hitting me as we're looking at that is this, and it's that saying we talk about sometimes that says, truth is not something you can teach. It has to be revealed.
Yeah.
And many times we want them to see the truth because we know the pain they're about to face, and so we keep trying to teach these things and then tell them all of our horror stories of what's going to happen to them. But the truth is, truth isn't something you can teach. It has to be revealed. It comes through revelation.
So as parents, what the natural tendency to do is when we see Connor moving towards the fence, we try to jump in the way of it. And what I'm suggesting is we stay, and we do this through laws, okay, by putting these controls around Connor. What I'm suggesting is let him experience what Luther calls the delicious despair. Let him experience the delicious despair. In fact, one of the ladies I was talking to, I said to her, one of the most beneficial things, oh boy, we're clear back at the beginning. One of the most beneficial things would be if the husband would come home and actually hit you, he would have to experience that delicious despair when he got put in jail. But if we get in the way and try to control and manipulate Connor, he can't ever feel the F's, the real consequences. All he feels is control and manipulation. The other thing is then, when he gets the F, we have a tendency, instead of being the person that Connor comes to for help, we go over and we kick him and tell him how stupid he is and tell him how we told you so, how we told you so. This is the exact same thing that can happen over here. Okay? Now let's use a different scenario. Let's use a scenario of porn. This is an example that happened literally at my high school, and we'll finish up with this. This happened in my high school, in my hometown, in Plymouth, Indiana. There was a guy, I'm going to have to change the names here. There was a lady, and we'll call her, we'll just use the Mary thing again, call her Mary. And there was a guy named Sam. Of course, that's not his name. Now, Sam is right here, and Sam has an issue with porn. Mary, under these scenarios, would have done just like I said, which is block the internet, block the magazines, check his phone, check his internet cache, all the little things you can do, put the electronic blocks on there for him, I mean, on and on, to try to control Sam. Mary didn't control Sam, though. Mary didn't try to control Sam. Mary wasn't approving of Sam's porn issues, but Mary didn't try to control Sam. What happened to Sam? Sam was a high school teacher, and he kept getting closer and closer, and finally he looked at porn on a computer at the high school. And what do you think happened?
Huge scandal. He gets fired.
A huge scandal, and he gets fired, and it was in the newspapers, etc. Look, you can't break the law. You cannot break the law. You only break yourself against these universal principles. Okay? It's just a matter of time. The problem is, if Mary gets in the way right here, she becomes the controller and manipulator. Sam resents Mary, and everything goes underground. If Mary stays out of the way, the natural consequences of the universe take hold, and Sam has to be responsible for his own life. Now, if she can stay out of the way of it, realize that's his issue, not Mary's issue, when he does get zapped, she can do a couple of things. She can say, now, I hate you. Or she can say, now, let's talk about it. In this moment, she can be a person that he can come back to, and they can have honest discussions about the situation, or she can come over here and try to kick him right after he gets zapped in the newspaper. So, when we look at Romans 14:13, this is the context, I believe, that this verse is talking about. Forget about deciding what's right for each other. Think about how strong of language that is right out of Scripture. Forget about deciding what's right for each other. Here's what I want. Here's what you need to be concerned about. That you don't get in the way of someone else, making life more difficult than it already is. So, what we're going to do is we're not going to get in the way. We're not going to control and manipulate. We're going to make decisions when necessary to put boundaries around ourselves, but not boundaries around other people. I'm talking adults and teenagers and people that can make their own decisions. I'm not talking about a 2-year-old here. We're not going to control and manipulate Sam. We're going to love Sam. When Sam goes close here and gets zapped, we're going to be there for Sam. Now, guess what that looks like? In fact, we'll end with this. Let me ask you a question. There's been times in your life where you've been zapped. You've gotten very close to that invisible fence. and the consequence has been very powerful. Did God stop you from getting to that invisible fence?
No.
Did God come over and kick you after you got zapped?
Nope.
Did God love you any less after you got zapped?
He can't.
After you got zapped, did you want to be closer to? Did it pull you closer to or away from God?
I ran to him.
This is the delicious despair. When we don't get in the way of someone, but we allow God to do his thing, we have a tendency to run back to God. Because God's universal principles, the way he set up this whole entire universe, is he's got it under control, even without us intervening. He can handle it. He can handle Sam without Mary jumping in, cutting in on him, manipulating, controlling. If God thought the proper way to handle people from moving away from sin was manipulation and control, God would have put in a system for him to manipulate us, but he didn't. Our God is not a God of manipulation. Because why? It's not the most effective way for transformation to occur. He knows that. We have to let people choose. And when they choose, they have to experience the pain necessary to turn them back towards God. It's a beautiful act of love. It is a beautiful act of love. And when we cut in, manipulate, and control, it's an ugly act of selfishness that comes from us wanting our way as opposed to us being concerned for the other person's growth. Okay, we'll finish with that. Comments? What are your thoughts, Derek Mattinger?
Man, so much great stuff tonight. I really like what Brent said. I think he put it best when he said you can only put these boundaries around yourself. And you followed up with they have to be these healthy boundaries. Right. And when if you go back to the screen you just finished on, when Sam's fallen and he's getting ready to hit that fence, this is what I see when I'm working with people in recovery. They have to hit the fence.
Yeah.
They're not going to get better until they do. And then when they do hit that fence and they come running for help, they put these boundaries around themselves so they can get better.
See, but notice the difference. Because once they run back to God, then they become Sally, not Sam. And then they put their own boundaries around themselves. That's healthy. It's when we try to put them around them that's the control.
And the other example I have, for the first time I've been working with some parents of a teen who's addicted to pills.
Yeah.
They're trying to put the boundaries around the son.
Yeah.
And it's a disaster. They're trying to love him, but as you read Galatians, the works of the flesh, one of them is selfish ambitions, and they're trying to protect their image instead of loving their son, which is a very hard thing to do sometimes.
Yes.
So this is great stuff, and I think it applies in all kinds of situations.
Sure. Lisa, you have anything to add?
Yeah, a couple of things struck me when Brent was talking earlier with the little box and the big box, that when the dog hits the fence, he goes back to the place that's safe. And I think many times go to your previous screen. Can you go to the screen right before this one?
That
I think
one?
if Sally is kind of in that doghouse with Sam and he hits the fence, if she has been able to remember where her worth comes from, she can also be a part of that safe person that Sam can come back to. But in order for her to not have these listed conditions here, there has to be a huge work of Christ within her for her to really, I'm speaking from experience, to really live Romans 14. It's a huge work.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, really what we're talking about with the invisible fence is what I would consider to be a relational growth issue. And if you're individually not healthy, it's going to be impossible for you to be relationally healthy. It's going to be impossible. If you don't understand your value is in Christ and not your marriage, you're not going to be able to respond in a healthy way in your marriage. Right? That's, I think, what you're saying, right, Lisa? Okay. Brent, are you there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Anything to add?
No,
all I tried to do was flesh out some of the things that you were talking about with real life situations.
Well, this brought up just a couple of things for me, and one of them was this. You know my story. I almost drowned about 8 years ago. I got sucked to the bottom of an 18-foot whirlpool, and I couldn't get out of it. And this is the way I kind of look at it like this. I needed to hit the bottom of that 18-foot hole because when I hit it, I was able to there was nowhere else left to go, which actually got my feet underneath me because I was at my bottom. At that point, there was only one way left, and that was to look up. And in that scenario, I pushed with all I could and got my face above water. But if we keep trying to get in the way of a person who God is saying, let them hit bottom, because when they do, then the revelation comes, this is not good for me, I want God. We're keeping them in that 18-foot hole. We're keeping that person at 12 feet or 6 foot or even 1 foot. Even at 1 foot, that person's going to drown because they haven't had the revelation that God is all they need. They've got to hit that place. So
yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's a critical. We all have our own stuff we've got to go through, and it's amazing how difficult it can be to just get out of the way. But I really like what you said. Once you hit your bottom was like this fence, and once you hit that and pushed off, boom, you go right back to safety.
Well, we get frustrated. We think, well, shouldn't their bottom be, where mine was or whatever it is? No, everybody's got their own story, so treat them gently. God's boundaries work, and their bottom is not going to look the same way. Hitting bottom for them is not going to look the same way.
Yeah, that's right.
Revelation comes in His time.
Yeah. Okay. Did anybody else have anything to add that we need to address, Brent? Otherwise, we'll pray and be done.
There was a question by someone, but it was kind of a long one, and it would have. We'll go back to another time.
All right, very good. Brent, you want to pray for us, and we'll kind of finish?
Yeah, sure. God, boy, none of us like hitting bottom because we know it's not so much about the hitting bottom; it's that journey on the way there. Because all the way down, we're having all the unhealthy stuff. What's going to happen if I hit bottom? All the fear and the anxiety and all the stuff that drew us to the bottom that's not good for us. But there was something I know in my life for hitting whatever bottom looked like for me. I couldn't fake it anymore. I couldn't get out of it. Hitting bottom for me was, I can't do this on my own. And in that moment, there was a release of just like holding my hands out like a child does to a father saying, pick me up. And I reached out my arms, and God, you were there. And I think probably all of us in this cyber room here where we're going through this have had those experiences where we can say, the mountaintops, they're neat. We can, see a long way, but there's something about the valleys where life is really formed. It's difficult, but that's where you find real life growing. And that's where you grow us up the most. I'm reminded of in Thessalonians where it says, all these struggles are further evidence that God's decided to make us fit for the kingdom. And God, you allow us to go through these things by our choices, but yet like a father you shepherd us with your heart, knowing what's best for us, allowing us to make those choices that we realize the only way left is to come back to you. And God, that unconditional love is what we all would love to have in this world, and the only place we find it is in you. And wow, your love, the Bible says, was extravagant. You held nothing back, and then you instruct us to love like that. God, teach us how to love like that. Teach us how to love enough to draw boundaries around ourselves and not around other people. And then just behold your glory as you work the impossible in many ways. And God, thank you for this evening and the teaching. And help us to remember as our week goes on. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
One final thing that hit me that I wanted to mention was, it is so easy. We've been talking about relationships now, but what is so easy is when someone gets zapped and they hit this spot. We know that's the moment where they start to turn back to God. That is a holy moment where they start turning back to God. And I'm begging you that as part of a church, as part of a religious institution, this is not the time to turn your back on people. There has been so much history of the religious institutions. The moment this happens, they then turn their back. They excommunicate them. They kick them out of church. They say they're not good enough for the church. And I would suggest this is the holy moment where they start turning back to God, that the church actually can be more effective than any other time. It's more effective than the time when they're moving this way, where we have to stay out of the way. This is where effectiveness can really occur when it comes to helping, coming alongside, creating a safe environment, and supporting each other in Christ. And yet the enemy wants us to say, no, as soon as a Christian hits this fence, you need to do away with him. Don't connect with him anymore. There's not any verse in Scripture that would support that kind of concept. Oh yeah, 1 Corinthians 5. Nope. Even then, Paul says, anything that's done is for the purpose of restoring. And so as that person starts to move back towards restoration, we take, because of this fence, we take and we engage with that person, love them, create a safe environment for them. This is not the time to give up on them. I just meant to mention that earlier, and I think it's so crucial for our churches to heed that. All right, that's it, guys. We're out of here. Thanks so much for being involved tonight, and I'll be signing off here shortly.